Hello, good evening everyone, and welcome to Oxford House and to the Somali Week. And this evening we have got the Anglo-Somali Society, which is partnered with KAID and the Somali Week for the last almost every year. So I am Claudia Ibrahim and I'm the chair of Anglo-Somali Society. I'm also a board member of KAID. So in here now, I am actually the Anglo-Somali Society. So those of you who don't know Anglo-Somali Society, it's actually one of the oldest institutions that any Somali had. It's now, this year, the 65th year, and it's been founded in London. We produce twice a year for this journal. It's available in here. And it has really a lot of information. Research is old and new, and we have got 3 funds. And this is our membership. It's available in here, so you can really join us. I will encourage you to join us. Tonight is really session is very, very interesting, and I would really like to introduce you to, and it's about the environment, the pastoralism and extreme weather in the Somali region, in the whole, where the Somalis are. So tonight, the speakers are actually very knowledgeable people, I could say. It is Hannah Khadar. Hannah Khadar actually is a quality assurance analyst at TikTok with experience in AI training, disaster management, and governance in the Somali region. Fluent in Somali, she combines cultural insights with expertise in tech innovation. And James Firebrace is a researcher, author, and decades of work on famine, drought and displacement in the Horn of Africa, founder of JFA, and he advises on strategic responses to crises affecting vulnerable communities in the Horn. In the Horn, say that? Okay. And we have got Martin Cotton, who is also the head of UK Development and Communications at Samsung Foundation, who works in Mogadishu. Did I say that? Okay. And since 2004, and brings over 35 years of non-profit communication and advocacy experience, including 12 years in senior roles at Islamic Relief. I will really hand it over to them, and I will start with chair team, which is Hannah and Fireplace, and then Martin will also do his questions will be later.
Assalamu alaikum and hello. Today we'll be discussing AI and weather forecasting systems in the Somali Pastoralist Peninsula. So what we do is we cover the entire Somali Horn. So that's also including the Somali regional state in Ethiopia and also the northeastern districts in Kenya. This is the region that we cover. First, we'll understand forecasting systems and their limitations, and then we'll explore this from a pastoralist perspective and some work that we've done there, and then we'll discover 3D pools and the new age of AI and weather forecasting systems. So we've been working together with professors from Cambridge University, Climate Hazard Institute in California, professor from Reading, and also some other institutions on this. So it will be me, Hannah Khadar, and James Firebrace. So, on to you.
Right, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change in the Horn of Africa, in the Somali regions, and also about forecasting and where that's got to. And Hannah will be talking a lot about where it's going, because it's quite an exciting time. So very quickly, this chart, we call it the mountains and bridges, basically shows you the whole of the value chain from observing. Let's see if this works. Yes, can you see my red spot? So right at this end, you've got the first observations, picked up by weather stations, picked up by satellites, picked up by ships, aircraft, all sorts of sources. And then all the way down this value chain, there's a whole number of steps, turning that into a forecast, turning that into something that assesses how important the event is going to be, all the way down this end to the decision. So here you might have the Met Ops telling you it's going to rain tomorrow, and here you're sitting here deciding you will pack your umbrella when you go out tomorrow. So it's that kind of sequence. But there's quite a lot that goes into it. And 2 points about this. One is it's more geared towards events. So when you think of the Horn of Africa, you've got events which are more like floods. So when it floods, it's raining hard in X place, and then a day, 2 days later, it's flooding somewhere else. That's an event. Whereas a drought, if you think about it, is right over the whole season, a 3-month period. It could start very rainy, but it doesn't. If the next 2 months are dry, it's still a drought. So there's a bit of a difference there. And although the general public are listening to weather forecasts in this country, in the Horn of Africa, that's not really the case. The pastoralists are not really at the end here yet, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Yes, it works. Right, so look, very quickly, this is fascinating if you ever had time to study it. Each of these bars is a season. So it starts off right back in 1996, all the way through to 2024, really. So it's got 28 years worth of data. If you go further back, it gets a bit blurry, but this is reasonably reliable. And of course, there's 2 seasons a year, the Gu and the Dare in Somali terms. So each of those, MAM is March, April, May, which is the Gu, and OND is October, November, December, which is the Dare. So I put it in Somali terms at the top here. But what's interesting, just a couple of things to point out here, is if you look at the last 8 years, since 2016 to 2014, if you look here, there's been quite a few dramatically wet years and quite a few dry years, including this, which was a horrendous drought, 2016-17, which came out after some rather indifferent years, and this, which was 5 years in a row, 5 seasons in a row of drought. So those are the 2 dramatic. We've had 2 dramatic events in the last decade. But if you compare this period, the last 8 years, to the previous 16 years, I think you can see you've got more dramatic rainfall events, you've got more droughts, but nevertheless, it's always been the case that the Somali region has droughts and flooding and those kind of events, but they're getting more serious. And if you look at what the climate change people say, they're predicting that actually more serious, more extreme events, but also more rainfall, but more temperature. So it's lots of conflicting factors, if you like. Right, I mentioned temperature because that's the other big factor. If you think of what's important to a pastoralist, it's the grass, it's the pasture out there that the animals can feed on. If there's no pasture, the animals die. So the 2 big drivers of that are, of course, rainfall. That's the primary thing. If there's no rain, you don't get pasture. But also, as the temperature goes up, it gets more difficult because the grasses dry out quicker. You might have that rain at the beginning of the season, but within a month or 2, it's really hot and it's all dried up. So that's the other factor. And if you drew a kind of a line to join the 1990 rainfall, this of course goes all the way down here. This is just the top, from 32 degrees to 33.5. But if you drew a line, you can see it's gone up by pretty close to 2 degrees in that period. 1980 to 24, that's 44 years. If you think of the global climate predictions, which get alarmed at 2 degrees since industrialization, this is just over the last 40 odd years. And by the way, this is Ethiopia and Somalia. If you took the Somali figures alone, which we're trying to take out of the data, it's an even more dramatic temperature rise. Right, so this is our big theme, which is forecasting at the moment is not really hitting the sweet spot, if you like, for pastoralists. I don't think these green ones are showing up very well, but if you look, basically this is a graph showing the prediction time, so that's the time ahead for the forecast, the lead time. What will it be doing in 2 weeks? What will it be doing in 3 months? That's the lead time, as against the area of the graph. And so what you get at the moment is you get forecasts like our Met stations in Britain that tell you it's going to be rainy in day after tomorrow, it's going to be wet, or there's going to be high storms or whatever. So nowadays, this short-term stuff is getting really good. Hannah will talk a bit about the AI implications for that, but that's what we call Generation 1, so the traditional weather forecast, if you like. And then at the other end of the scale here, you can't read this, but it says long-term climate forecasts for the whole of the eastern part of Africa. So again, they're getting really good at that. They can tell that this is going to be a dry year, or a very dry year, and that obviously is really useful. But it's not so useful for the pastoralists. That's what we call, that last one we call Generation 2. There's been breakthroughs in physics and understanding El Nino, La Nina, various things that make this an exciting territory. But we've done various interviews, a whole string of interviews throughout the Somali region, and what we get told is that's neither of those are particularly useful for pastoralists, because what they want is to know what the whole season is going to be like, and with enough lead time for them to do something about it. So that's what we call the pastoralist gap, and that's what we're encouraging the Met people to develop. So I think on the last one I mentioned this box here covers the whole of the eastern horn of Africa. So it's forecast averaged over everything from northern Kenya right through to Djibouti, if you can imagine that kind of, almost 2,000 kilometre scale. And average, they're pretty good, but the average is not good enough for the pastoralists. And the reason is because there's enormous variation in the rainfall throughout this enormous region. Here's our region. I think Hannah showed you what it was like at the beginning. And so we've done, as best we can, some analysis of how it varies in the region. So if you look at this top line here, that's what the scientists say is their prediction, which is usually right, for an average for the whole area. So this is 1, and it's averaged out at 1, or so you can see if you compare this to these 3, which are the actual experience of the pastoralists. What was it like what was the DARE 2024 like for you? And they give you an answer, and we try and quantify that in some way. It was very dry, so it was really heavy rain. So that's what this colour coding means. And if you just focus in a bit on 2016-17, that was starting here, DARE 2016. This was dramatic territory for pastoralists. Enormous loss of livestock in the northern areas. And essentially what happened was the pastoralists here in Togdere, Sarag, Seoul, those areas in northern part of the region, some of them, it's fascinating what actually happened. Some of them, most of them went down to here, to the Howard, which is in the border area, beyond the border in the Somali state. And there were so many pastoralists in this area. Initially the pasture wasn't bad, but there were so many pastoralists, all the grass was eaten out, again a massive loss of livestock, and some of them continued their trek all the way down to here, which is the Chiveli River. And if they got there, they would go saved. Those are the ones who survived. Many of them in this, who didn't get any further, suffered enormous loss of livestock. Others went from here to Puntland. Karkar region in Puntland was relatively wet, and so they survived. Others went west into western Somaliland, west of Hargeisa, the agri-pastoralist areas, and again the stubble of the pastoralists, of the agriculturalists, and they tend to survive. So it's a dramatic picture, depending on what decision you made as a pastoralist, which way you would go, south, east, or west. But it makes our point that actually these general forecasts are not good enough. What the pastoralists want to know is, where will the pasture be? Will it be severe in our area? And then they can take steps in advance. Right, I think this is the last one from me, but it shows that earlier slide in a bit more detail. So again, here, if you can just pause a second and look at this. Here you've got the forecast lead time, everything from 1 hour. It's going to be raining in Tower Hamlets in 1 hour's time, and they're getting really good at that. Even these short-term, what we call Generation 1 forecasts, with the help of AI, they're extending now 10 days, almost up to a month now. It's quite dramatic a change. Then you've got, so that's the sort of short-term stuff, then you've got this long-term seasonal forecast, but they're right up here in terms of the whole region, and we're encouraging them to come down, if you like, in this kind of an arc down like this, to fill this forecast gap, what the pastoralists need. We just put in climate change here as an example of how the whole of the weather system is changing. So obviously all this needs to take into account the fact that climate is changing generally, hotter, more dramatic. So I think that's enough on that. There's a lot more detail here, which is the size of the circles, gives you an idea of the time frame. This is the lead time, but this is the time frame of the prediction. Is it for a day or is it for a whole season? And then the darker patch here, we're trying to get 4 dimensions on this one sheet. The darker shows you the ones that are more precise, more accurate. So I think at that point I'm going to hand back to Hannah, who's going to talk about where all this is going. It's an exciting time.
Thank you so much, James. And I think we'll just continue from the forecast gap. So as James has explained about forecast in the Eastern Horn of Africa, there's only one forecast for the entire region, hence why there are variations. And for example, it might say there's going to be drought in one part of the area, whereas in some parts we are having heavy flooding. So the numeric AI weather models. So a lot of people, including the ECMWF and Google DeepMind, are all working on an AI system. And we also possibly want to do that for the Somali Peninsula as well. So I'll just quickly explain the difference between the traditional approach and an AI system and how that would work. So the traditional weather forecasting system is done through a numerical weather prediction, a physics-based model. So they pick up weather stations, they pick up observations, satellites, radars, weather balloons, and so on. And then they just put it into a numerical weather prediction system, and that gives you the outcome. Now, what that does not take into account is all the weather phenomena in the Indian Ocean. For example, the MGO, the Maiden Julian Oscillation System, and also the ENSO, the sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean. And interesting enough, taking that into account into a weather prediction model will train the system in memorizing everything that's happening, so all the teleconnections, which just means all the variables. So for example, it's raining in area A today, that means it's going to rain in area B in the next 2 weeks. So, and the model can be trained on that what previously happened. So that would just bridge the gap. A lot of people are working on it. We're having conversations with Cambridge University, Google DeepMind, and also Chris Funk from the Climate Hazard Institute. So a lot of the work from Chris Funk is actually being used for FuseNet. So to alert donors and so on, if there's going to be droughts in the region, if there's going to be heavy flooding and so on. So in order for us to train such a system, obviously we need really good data. Unfortunately, we would not have any weather balloons in the Somali Peninsula area. So the 3D printed automatic weather stations, the 3D pools, would be a very good solution. So these are solar panels that work with solar energy and so on. The automatic weather stations, so everything they pick up goes automatically to the cloud. So you wouldn't really need any maintenance for these. And this is probably something that will be very good in those regions. Currently, there are some weather stations in the Somali Horn, but unfortunately these are local met stations, they're not advanced. They're manual stations, you have to pick up the data, put it into a computer and so on. So some of the data can be faults. So we want to put the new 3D pools, and we had some conversations in implementing these across the Somali Horn. So first, to give you a quick case study in the Somali regional state, it's about 376,000 kilometers squares, and this, from Chris Funk, he believes 75 of these weather stations, these new automatic weather stations would be very good. And we're going to use this as a case study, and inshallah do it for the rest of all the Somali regions, Somalia and so on, and also parts of Djibouti. I think I forgot to mention that. Obviously, the Shanta Somalia, people know what I'm talking about, but Somali-wide, I think, would be the phrase. So yeah, that's our project, and thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much to Somali Week and also to Cade and to Ayan for organising this event and for the way in which Somali Week has become a platform not only for arts and culture and tradition and celebrating all of those things, but also thinking about contemporary Somalis, contemporary Somalia and Somaliland, and the contemporary issues and challenges that people face. Because I think it's really important to talk about those and to think about what the solutions might be and how we can work together towards those solutions. So I am privileged to work for Zamzam Foundation UK, and you'll see here a little bit about Zamzam Foundation and Zamzam Foundation UK. So Zamzam Foundation is the biggest charity in Somalia. It was established by Somalis in 1992, and it's grown to the extent that last year it supported 2.6 million people, right from Somaliland and Puntland in the north, down through all the regions in between, to Lower Juba in the extreme south. So the organisation has 8 offices across that area, and lots of local projects all over that area. Zamzam Foundation UK is newly established at the end of last year, but it's linked to an organisation that you might have heard of called the Somali Relief and Development Forum. So various Somali diaspora organisations in 2011 got together in the face of a severe famine to do what they could working together to support people in Somalia. And SRDF has now formed a partnership with Zamzam Foundation. What that means is that for the first time really, the Somali diaspora, the Muslim community here, have the opportunity to support the amazing work that Zamzam Foundation does by donating through the Zamzam UK website. So a little bit about context of climate change more widely than the specifics we've just been hearing. If you look at the research for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the IPCC, it talks about who's most vulnerable to the way the climate is changing. And they say it's between 3 billion and 3.6 billion people are particularly vulnerable to the way the climate is changing in terms of its impact on their lives. So that means that over 40% of the world's population. And you see there some of the areas of the world that are most vulnerable, some of the people that are most vulnerable, and those people certainly include Somali pastoralists. Some information there, just giving you an example of the human impact of what you saw in some of those graphs with the challenging ebb and flow of flooding and of drought in recent years. So if you look at that, one of those droughts that James highlighted, a very deep drought between 2020 and 2023, in which 5 successive rains failed, they've worked out that over 70,000 people died in that period as a result of the drought. And yet as soon as the rains came, in that same year, in 2023, Somalia experienced the worst floods in living memory. 2.5 million people affected, 1.2 million people lost their homes. And on the right of the slide there, you see a snapshot of something called the Notre Dame Gain Index, which is an index that measures how vulnerable countries are to climate change and how well prepared they are to deal with the effects of climate change. And Somalia is right at the bottom of that table, in amongst the bottom 10, signifying that it's one of the most vulnerable countries and one of the least well prepared. This, I think, is very sobering, because what it illustrates is that the countries worst affected by climate change are those who are least responsible for creating it. The main cause of human-created climate change is carbon emissions, and most of the carbon emissions come from richer countries, from the industrialized world. So you'll see there the very graphic difference between the amount of carbon emissions that we are responsible for in countries like the UK and the US, and the contrast with Somalia. If you're just talking about emissions from the use of CO2 in the use of fossil fuels in industry, per capita use of fossil fuels, and the impact of industry, then what one person in the UK generates is equivalent to 46 people in Somalia. So that's the mismatch that exists. A little bit about how Zamzam is helping Somalis to fight back. And it's really become something that's cross-cutting in the organisation's work, because we work in so many different areas: clean water, health, education, livelihoods, peace building, and in every single one of those areas, climate change is having an impact, and we're needing to do something about it. So there's just some examples there. People are being displaced by drought and displaced by flooding. So we help them when they're in displaced people's camps with life-saving food and water and shelter. We do a lot of support for livelihoods. So the 2 people you see in the picture there, Fartoon, who is in the first picture, and Abdi Kader, who is in the second picture, they are both farmers, one in Middle Shabelle and the other in Hiram, and they've had support from Zamzam to learn climate-smart agriculture so that they can survive on their land, provide for their families, and they've experienced increased yields and increased income through this project. Besides that training in how to deal with changes in the climate, if you're a farmer, we've also been involved in providing water sources. When there's less rainfall, to stay on your land, you need a better supply of water. So Zamzam, in its 33-year history, has drilled over 180 bore wells, and last year alone it brought clean water to over 970,000 people. You've also got health challenges because when there's a drought, you get more malnutrition, you get hungrier people, and so our health facilities are supporting people affected by malnutrition. But also, when there's flooding, you get a greater incidence of waterborne diseases like cholera, acute watery diarrhea. So we respond to that as well through our work. And finally, peace building. Of course, there is macro level conflict in Somalia and in the region, but there is also micro level conflict on the ground, often along clan lines, and increasingly that's about resources, because as climate change bites, there is more tension and more conflict over access to water, access to pasture, and one of the things we do through our peace building programs is we have trained local mediators in the community who bring those communities who are in conflict over resources together to tackle those challenges together and to build peace. I won't go through all of this in detail, but there's just a few figures there that show you all the different ways in which we're supporting farmers specifically. So farming represents 70% of the economy still in Somalia. So if you want to help everybody deal with climate change, then you really need to support farmers because they are the mainstay of the economy. And there's various examples there of the practical ways in which we're supporting farmers with seeds, with tools, with livestock when they lose their livestock to drought. But we also have cash for work programs, so there is certain community infrastructure that we want to help build, schools, health clinics, irrigation channels, and we will employ people from the local community in a cash for work program, so they get employment and the local infrastructure improves. We also make livelihood grants to vulnerable individuals, widows, young people. There's a very high rate of unemployment, providing seed funding for these people to set themselves up in business. And in an urban context, that might be as a market trader or a tailor or a shopkeeper or a tuk-tuk taxi driver. In rural settings, that would be a farming-related livelihood, so dairy farming, poultry farming. And there's Abdikader again, and that's a quote from him. "I've learned how to take care of my land better. I believe I can keep improving. My yields have significantly increased. I now have enough food to feed my family throughout the season, and the extra income has made a huge difference." This is Dr. Hassan Ali Yusuf, and I spoke to him just on Saturday morning. He was due to go to a climate change conference in Mogadishu yesterday, and he just talked me through some insights about pastoralists specifically, which of course is the topic we're talking about today. So he was talking about flooding and saying that a lot of when there are major floods, it's heavy rain in the mountains in Ethiopia, and that flows down into Somalia. But there's a major problem with soil erosion, because the more soil that gets swept into the river, the more sediment there is, and the bigger impact that has in terms of the area that is flooded. So better land management to protect the soil also means less of an impact through flooding. He talked about pastoralists and farmers being vital for food security, but he also said it's important to invest in livelihoods in urban settings, because some of these farmers and pastoralists have had to give up because of climate change. They've been driven to the cities, and their existence there can be pretty miserable unless ways can be found for them to establish a new livelihood. He talked about some of the specific ways in which Zamzam has helped pastoralists, and those include trialling, pioneering hydroponic methods of growing fodder in Baidoa. So hydroponics is a way in which you can grow things using a very small amount of water and not needing any soil. And Zamzam has helped farmers to produce fodder that way, which is very helpful when you're in the midst of a drought. Also vaccinating animals, providing health kits for community animal health workers. lots of different ways. And one of his reflections as well was that local organisations are doing fantastic, really important work alongside the community, because the bigger NGOs, they often have more resources, but they don't always have that presence on the ground. And he said that needs assessment is really important. So if you're there in the community, you can really understand who needs your support the most, but you can also spot the potential of people who have the skills and the cultural background to be able, with the right investment in their livelihoods, to really lift their families and lift the whole community. And he finished his conversation with me with a note of hope, and he did say, in spite of how difficult everything is because of climate change at the moment, there is hope for the future in quite how adaptable and resilient Somali pastoralists are. It's important not only to help people on the ground to deal with these challenges, but also to be vocal internationally about what's causing these problems, about how the international community can address them. And so we're privileged as Zamzam to be able to go to COP. The next one is in Brazil in a few weeks. The last one was in Azerbaijan, where there was a big breakthrough for climate finance for poorer countries. But our concern is that it's taking too long for that money to become available to people on the ground. And that's something that we must all press for, to make sure the people worst affected have access to the finance that they need. And just a little thing to finish, measure your own carbon footprint. That's actually mine on the left there. If you go to the WWF website, it breaks down your carbon footprint into 4 areas. So how you heat and light and everything that you do with your home, things related to your food, where it comes from, how it's transported, how it's produced, things related to your travel, how you get around, and the fuel that's used for that. And then the category they call stuff, which is basically you as a consumer, what you buy, how it's produced, the impact of that on the environment. So you can find out what your carbon footprint is, but also you can find out how to reduce it. And there's just a few examples there of what you can do practically on those different fronts. You'll see in the graph on the right that you've got the dark blue and the green and the blood red bands there. And what those indicate is carbon dioxide emissions. The first one in the dark blue is CO2 embedded in imports of goods and services to the UK. The second one, in the green, is CO2 from UK produced goods, so industry here, industry and services in the UK. And the bottom one is about UK households, it's about us as consumers. So it's very noticeable, isn't it, that the footprint of carbon dioxide from the first 2 is going down, and the one based on consumption by households and what we're doing as consumers is kind of bumping along at the same level. So that's a challenge to us as individuals. And final slide, you may have come across carbon offsetting. So, if you fly, sometimes your airline will say, are you prepared to pay a carbon offsetting supplement? And generally what that is for is that you're acknowledging that flying is one of the most carbon hungry things that you can do, and therefore one of the most destructive things you can do climatically. If you carbon offset, you give a bit of extra money, and that's used to plant trees in poorer countries. Another way that I would encourage you to think about it is there are charities like Zamzam that are helping people on the ground to adapt to climate change. So if you're concerned about your own climate footprint and you want to offset, another way that you can do something very positive is you can give to charities that are supporting people in the front line of climate change. Thank you very much.